Yo, what is up, guys? Will here from the Fantasy Flock with Canyon, and we are talking about some early round draft strategies for your upcoming NBA fantasy drafts. I think having a plan going into drafts, we're going to be talking about points format specifically. We have a category video where we talked about category strategies, but having a strategy and understanding what you can expect heading into your draft is super important. Obviously, you're setting the tone for your entire season. Obviously, a lot of leagues you can make trades and waiver claims, but for the most part, you're setting your lineup for the beginning of the year at the draft. So overall, strategy-wise, first thing I want to say is understand your scoring format. Obviously, there's points leagues and category leagues. Obviously, those are two different. You obviously would know which one you're playing in heading into the draft. But individual sites have different point scoring formats. Some have negative points for, field goal attempts. Maybe it's -2 for a turnover instead of -1. So just understanding, I don't think necessarily from what I've seen between different sites that there's a crazy impact. I think for the most part, they do similar things, but some sites, it's 2 points for an assist instead of 1.5. And there's a little bit of a discrepancy between different point categories that give different amount of points. So understanding that's pretty important because that can kind of be tiebreakers between players for you. I think that's super important because you're just kind of understanding that before you head into your draft. Definitely.
Yeah, and on top of that format, make sure you also look at your site's rankings formats. If you're drafting on ESPN or Yahoo or whatever it is, check out what their draft site looks like as far as their rankings when you get into your draft room. For example, ESPN right now at the time of this recording, they have LaMelo Ball 4th overall and they have KD 15th overall. That's a pretty big discrepancy that you'll see in any other site, especially with the LaMelo injury news. He's still 4th overall. KD should not be 15th in a points league, I don't think. So some sites are really, really strange with their rankings. So, you can take that to your advantage to make sure, you see someone down there that shouldn't be down there. And so when you're drafting in those early rounds, just don't be a slave to your site's ADP. Make sure you're using different rankings, your own rankings. Just don't be a slave to that ADP. And then on top of this, understand your league starting requirements, your starting lineups. Do you have a guard/forward spot, a guard spot, forward spot, all that construction. Make sure you understand how many utilities you have, how many benches you have, IAR spots, how many of each position you need to draft, because if you have only one center spot, then you want to target a high value big early on, like an Embiid or Jokic if you're lucky enough to get those picks. And there's maybe a lot fewer elite bigs anyway in the first round. So targeting bigs early is a good strategy for these early round stuff because, you get later in the drafts, you'll find out in the next video as well that, late round bigs maybe aren't the move. So target higher value bigs early on if you can, especially if your starting requirement only has, a certain amount of guards or a certain amount of centers. So understanding your league starting requirements and roster rotation as well as your site rankings and draft player list is very important.
Definitely. And in the earliest rounds, I really think that we need to lean towards safety. So, like we had mentioned, LaMelo Ball is a guy who's, been a first round pick. He's a very popular breakout guy. But with the injury, you just have to move him down. I'm just taking a lot of other players ahead of him because what are the odds that LaMelo, even with his breakout that we're expecting, is significantly better in a points format than a guy like Ja or Tatum or even Dame? So I just think you don't want to get too cute and, project these breakouts, especially ones that are dealing with an injury that's expected to, keep him out at the beginning of the season. For guys like that, even though I do like the breakout, most of the time your first 2 round guys are just going to be amazing, right? If there's no injuries to these guys, nothing significant, and it's, a pretty normal season for everyone, the first 2 rounds, there's not going to be too many misses. A lot of these guys are super high usage. So getting cute and trying to take a breakout for a player who's currently injured or, dealing with an injury heading into the season, I just fade and go to my next guy. I don't feel the need to get too cute in those early rounds because I don't think you can necessarily win your league in the first 2 rounds, but I do think you can lose it if you get too risky, too cute. You reach for, a guy who's dealing with an injury risk. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, and on top of that with injuries, right, they should really be, unless it's like a significant injury, if you're between 2 different guys, the injury should about be that tiebreaker, and that's about it. I wouldn't worry too much about injuries, especially with guys that don't have crazy history. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't really handle what happens with injuries, so don't worry about it too much with most guys. There's some exceptions though, right? With guys like Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, guys coming off season-ending injuries, or guys that have just habitually been out for over half of a season. You can factor that in, but at the end of the day, their ADP is most likely already adjusted to that risk in certain formats. So injuries, I wouldn't put too much into that. It could be a tiebreaker if you're between a couple players for sure, but don't let someone fall too far just because, he's got it, he'll be out for 2 weeks, or he might be, unavailable for the start of the season.
Yeah, like we talked about, I really think in the early rounds, you're going with safe, high usage, proven players. You're not trying to get too cute. And in the mid rounds, you kind of look for solidified usage and roles. And obviously later, like we'll talk about, you're getting more upside picks. So I think in these early rounds, what's really important is to focus on, players you feel really safe with. And, you don't necessarily need to reach for crazy upside, in the first couple rounds, because we've seen the usage over the past couple seasons, right? For a lot of these guys, it's not like we're predicting a breakout in the first 2 rounds. We've seen evidence of the breakout over the past couple seasons, or just the previous season. So trying to get too cute in those first 2 rounds, first 3 rounds, and reaching for players isn't worth it. And lastly, just kind of as a general draft strategy thing for any fantasy sport you play, but for NBA definitely, like we had mentioned with the different sites having different ADPs and rankings, you kind of want to look ahead in your draft. So when you're drafting players, maybe you personally value a guy a lot higher than other people will, but maybe you don't need to take him in the early rounds because he is more of a mid-round player. So just kind of understanding where players are going in drafts, I think is a really good way to take advantage of your teammates who are more of, ADP checkers, and they're just following the site's rankings. And, you can definitely get yourself some values by not reaching for those players because they're going to fall to you a certain spot in drafts.
And yeah, that was our early round draft guide. We'll have another one coming up. See you in the next video for the late round draft guide.